Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dr. Anna Cohen, and I'm the founder and chair of the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, presented to you by the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. Our federation has a long-standing commitment to Holocaust education, which is ever more vital in our contagious society. We support our schools and encourage them to educate the next generation about the lessons of the Holocaust, to create a world without prejudice and hate. Thanks to our Survivor Speakers Bureau, the Federation is ensuring that the stories of our local survivors and their families are being told. In fact, since 2014, more than 20,000 students have had a life-changing and memorable experience of having a live Holocaust survivor speak in their classrooms. Today's commemoration focuses on the importance of memory, and in the 80th anniversary year of the end of World War II, we honor the memory of 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust and the millions of brave men and women during World War II under the command of General Eisenhower, who, with our allies, fought the Nazis so courageously and who liberated the concentration and killing camps. May we always remember, and may their memories be a blessing. And now, please join me as we welcome the board chair of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota, Deb Kabinoff.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Deb Kabinoff, chair of the board of the Jewish Federation of Sarasota-Manatee. On behalf of our CEO, Shepard Englander, our board, and our federation team, it is my honor to welcome you to the commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day and the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. From the very beginning, our federation has been committed to Holocaust education, working with both Sarasota and Manatee County schools to provide teachers with training and resources, and supporting our Holocaust survivors locally, ensuring that they have access to health care and housing. I want to take a moment to thank all of you who have made gifts to support our ongoing Holocaust education programs. Thank you very much. Our work is more important than ever today as we continue to see a sharp rise in anti-Semitism worldwide. Tonight's theme is the importance of memory, especially as we reflect on the promise of never again. We honor and carry on the memory of those we lost, those who survived, and those who fought so bravely to liberate. We also remember all of those whom we have lost since the end of World War II in Israel's fight for independence and freedom, and since October 7th. Let us all remember and let us all hope that the remaining hostages will return home, that we will see peace for Israel, and that we can work together to combat hatred. Now I would like to invite Rabbi Cantor Marcy Vickis to lead us through this evening's program. Thank you.
Good evening. As you now know, my name is Rabbi Cantor Marcy Vickis, and I'm honored to serve as your host for this evening's program in commemoration of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Thank you for joining us as we stand together to reaffirm the importance of memory and reflect on one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Holocaust. On this 80th anniversary of the end of World War II and the liberation of the concentration and killing camps, we commit to honor the memory of the millions of lives lost and to celebrate the resilience of survivors. This remembrance serves as a poignant reminder of the atrocities committed during the Holocaust, as well as the need to remain vigilant against hatred, intolerance, and totalitarianism. This anniversary offers an opportunity to reflect on the lessons of history and to reaffirm our commitment to human rights. It is our enduring hope events like this will inspire future generations to build a world rooted in justice and mutual respect. This moment is not merely about recounting history, it is about understanding the vital role of memory in shaping our present and our future. Memory is more than the act of recalling events. It is a bridge that connects the past to the present, a testament to resilience, and a warning against indifference. The Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews and millions of other humans were systematically murdered, was not a sudden event. It was the culmination of years of prejudice, propaganda, and complicity. Remembering these truths is our moral obligation, for memory safeguards humanity against repeating such atrocities. When we remember, we honor the victims, those who perished, and those who survived to tell their stories. Their voices, though often silenced, echo in our collective conscience. Through their accounts, we absorb the enduring lessons they teach us about courage, compassion, hope, and the dangers of apathy. Memory serves another crucial purpose. It empowers education. Teaching younger generations about the Holocaust is not merely recounting facts. It is about instilling empathy, promoting critical thinking, and nurturing a commitment to justice. In a time when Holocaust denial and distortion threaten to erode truth, memory becomes our most potent tool in combating ignorance and hatred. Memory reminds us of the fragile nature of democracy and human rights. The Holocaust did not happen in a vacuum. It unfolded in a world that allowed bigotry and authoritarianism to flourish unchecked. By remembering, we remain vigilant, recognizing the warning signs of hate and the importance of standing against injustice wherever it arises. Today, as we reflect on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, let us commit to the power of memory, not as a static recollection, but as an active, living force. Let it inspire us to challenge prejudice, to value diversity, and to protect the dignity of all people. In doing so, we not only honor those who suffered and perished, but also ensure that their legacy continues to illuminate a path toward a more compassionate, just, and peaceful world. If you are able, I ask you to stand for a moment of silence to pay tribute to those whom we lost in the Holocaust and whose memory will remain in our hearts forever. Rishru shel hamayim berak hashamayim tvilat ha'adam ha'chol ve'hayam Rishru shel hamayim berak hashamayim tfilat ha'adam. I'm going to ask you to continue to stand as we ask Dr. Anna Cohen and Lotum and Ellie Levy to begin the lighting of 9 candles. The first candle is in memory of the 6 million Jews who perished in the Holocaust. The second candle is to remember the 1.5 million Jewish children, among them who were senselessly murdered. The third candle is in memory of the 5 million others whose lives were also taken by the Nazis and their collaborators. Next, we pay tribute to those individuals, Jewish and non-Jewish, who at great risk to themselves and their families resisted the Nazi regime. We light that fourth candle for those who helped rescue Jews by assisting them to escape or hide. The fifth candle is to pay tribute to the millions of brave American men and women who courageously fought the Nazis alongside our allies and who liberated the concentration and killing camps. The sixth candle is to pay tribute to all the brave men and women whose lives were lost in the name of the State of Israel. With the lighting of the seventh candle, we remember the more than 1,200 men, women, and children whose lives were lost during the horrific attacks of October 7th, 2023. Since October 7th, Israeli soldiers and citizens have lost their lives defending against Hamas and Hezbollah. We light the eighth candle to salute them and to remember those who are still held as hostages. The ninth candle is lit to honor all of the Holocaust survivors worldwide, not forgetting those who are no longer with us. To their families, we express our gratitude for sharing their stories and helping to keep their legacies and their memories alive. Amen. Thank you. Please be seated. This evening, we are fortunate to hear from some remarkable speakers who show us the undeniable and invaluable importance of memory. Our first speaker will be Lotum Levy, a third-generation Holocaust survivor, and her daughter Ellie, a fourth-generation Holocaust survivor. They will tell the story of Lotum's grandparents and what honoring their memory means to them.
My grandmother was the youngest of 6 children. Her oldest sister, Hannah, left home in 1936 and moved to Israel, where she quickly fell in love and became engaged to be married. When she moved away from home, Hannah had no idea what awaited the Jews of Europe. But because she moved away, she became the unintentional archivist that preserved a few precious letters her family wrote to her, the only words from her father and brother that my grandmother would ever hear again after she went into hiding as a 12-year-old girl. On July 17, 1938, my great-grandfather sent a letter to Hannah and her husband. My dear children, we are healthy, thank God, and we hope to hear the same from you always, amen. Now, dear children, we received your nice letter with joy. We were happy to hear about your good health. You cannot imagine how worried we were about your health in these times, especially when news comes from Israel. When there is bad news, the heart is heavy. I run 3 times a day to the post office to hear the news on the radio. When a letter arrives, it is a great joy, as you can imagine. When you write a letter and express worry about us, it is not justified. Why should you worry about us? You better write us 2 or 3 times a week. And don't worry. Dear children, is it possible for you to come home for a few months at my expense? When things cool down, you could go back to Israel. If it is not possible for the 2 of you, maybe you come by yourself. Every day I die from worry about the situation in Israel, and your letter comes after 5 weeks. It is hard to bear. Excuse me. If your husband agrees, come soon. And if not, write 3 times a week about your health. If not, you will cause me to get sick from worry. You write that you are nervous. This is nothing compared to my anxiousness about the matter in Israel. It drives me crazy. My nerves are frayed. And now I'm going back to listen to the news from Israel. Just over a year after Chana would have received this letter, the Nazis invaded Poland. Chana was absolutely justified in her worry for her family, but they never saw it coming. Despite the Arab revolt in Israel in the late 1930s, which kept my great-grandfather up at night with worry, Chana's refusal to come home to Poland likely saved her life. By the autumn of 1942, however, there was no denying what Hitler had planned for the Jews of Europe. My great-grandfather had Chana in Israel, his oldest son Chaim in Argentina, and 3 daughters and 1 son left in Poland. Moshe, my grandfather's 14-year-old brother, was the first in the family to be rounded up and taken to a German-controlled factory as slave labor. He was executed when the guards asked the prisoners who wanted to go home, and he naively raised his hand. Thus began my great-grandparents' frantic and Herculean efforts to save my grandmother's life. The story is long, the details are harrowing, but the end result was a kiss goodbye in the darkness of a cold Polish winter night as they hid their young child under a tarp in a horse-drawn carriage and watched it gallop away. They told her it would be temporary. They told her they would see her again in a few short months. I do not know if they believed it themselves. Surely they hoped against hope for it, but that was the last time she would feel their embrace, hear their voices, receive their blessing. Her sisters, her mother, and her father were all murdered while she was in hiding, and she was the sole survivor of her family in Poland. I have 3 daughters myself. I cannot begin to imagine the depths of desperation her parents felt that would have led them to know that sending their 12-year-old baby girl off with a new identity, an assumed unfamiliar religion, to work for a family most of whom did not know she was Jewish, and in which a single mistake in church, a single slip of the tongue, or a single display of emotion could have given away her secret, was the most humane, heroic, and selfless act they could have performed.
I never got the chance to meet my mother's grandmother. She was only 79 when I was born, but she lived an ocean away, and the week of my birth, she underwent major surgery. She survived the surgery but developed an air embolism when her central line was removed and never made it home. Of course, I have no memory of that time, but it feels now like a cosmic relay took place in November of 2007, and my great-grandmother passed me the baton. My great-grandmother's name was Rina. She chose that name, which in Hebrew means happiness. Her given name was stripped from her when she was forced into hiding as a young Jewish girl in Nazi-occupied Poland, and she was given a Catholic identity with a new name. After the war, despite the profound loss and heartache she carried, she chose happiness. 15 years later in Sarasota, Florida, I met Felicia Liban when she was invited to speak to my English class. Felicia told a familiar story of being a young Jewish girl in Poland, the mother who was desperate to save her, going into hiding with a Catholic family, assuming a new identity with a new name, and picking up the pieces when it was over. The name Felicia is derived from the Latin felicitas, happiness. More than their shared experiences and their eponymous joy, Felicia also looked eerily similar to photographs I'd seen of Rina. The light eyes, fair hair, facial features. Something about being in her presence made me feel for the first time a physical connection with my great-grandmother that I never had, a connection to my past that until then had only been theoretical. And I began to weep. Felicia took me into her arms and embraced me. The baton my great-grandmother handed me in 2007 has been proverbially gathering dust under a pile of clothes in my closet, and I knew then I had to start running with it. And that is why, under Betty Zaret's mentorship, I'm speaking with you today. We are commemorating the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, but we have learned, particularly over the last 16 months, that never again was not a promise. It was an aspiration that the Jews will always have to fight for. And one of those ways in which we can fight is by making sure that those who died, those who survived, and those who stood by our side are never forgotten.
My grandmother survived the Holocaust in hiding. My grandfather survived the camps. They lost everything and everyone they loved, endured physical and emotional hardship that we cannot begin to comprehend, and of course were incredibly lucky, as their stories could have ended very easily in a different way. If they were here, I think they would want us to never stop sharing their stories and those of their friends, families, neighbors, and communities. Never again means never forget. If they were here, I think they would want us to know that their ultimate victory over the Nazis was to live their lives choosing happiness. If they were here, I think they would want us to remember that our greatest strength is our unity, and we must never stop advocating and fighting for our own, no matter what the rest of the world has to say about it. But they are not here, so we are here for them, to honor the sacrifice my great-grandparents made to save their daughter. After all, we are only here because of it. And as my great-grandfather said in that same letter I excerpted earlier, may God help us and the hateful people among us be ashamed. May we always come out the winners.
Thank you so much, Lotam and Ellie, for sharing your memories. Mary, these are the things that touch our hearts, and we'll keep this with us forever. I am now delighted to introduce our keynote speaker, the remarkable Dr. Samuel Kassow, who just celebrated his 50th year teaching at Trinity College in Connecticut. Dr. Kassow was born October 3rd, 1946, in Wasseralfingen, a displaced persons camp in Stuttgart, Germany, to his parents Celia and Koppel. He grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, and is a leading historian of Polish Jewry and the Holocaust. Dr. Kassow earned a BA from Trinity College in Hartford, a Master's of Science from the London School of Economics, and a PhD from Princeton University. His mastery of Russian, German, Hebrew, and Polish, in addition to his native Yiddish, has given him access to numerous sources on Eastern European Jewish history, while his family background, painful as it was, has afforded him unique insights into the society's lived reality. Dr. Kassow is the author of the extraordinary Who Will Write Our History, which was adapted into a documentary film of the same name. The book offers a reconstruction of pre-war and Holocaust-era Warsaw through the life of Emanuel Ringelblum, a historian and Zionist social activist who created the massive Oyneg Shabbos archive in the Warsaw Ghetto. In addition to his groundbreaking scholarship, Dr. Kassow has engaged in invaluable educational endeavors, from teaching classes at Trinity College to curating museum exhibits and consulting for documentaries and podcasts. He has also trained and very generously encouraged emerging historians within Russia and Poland. Most recently, Dr. Kassow was awarded a National Jewish Book Award this week for his work in translation of the book Warsaw Testament. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Samuel Kassow.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to Sarasota. It's a pleasure to be here, and a special thank you to Betty Zaret and to Dr. Anna Cohn I was asked to say that last week I got a phone call from the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous, and they wanted me to come to Poland to participate in the 80th anniversary and have dinner with King Charles. But I said, I can't do that because I have to be in Sarasota. So here I am. It's very appropriate that since tonight we're talking about memory, that I describe one of the most successful examples of cultural resistance in World War II, a battle for memory, and the main weapon in that battle was the Onyx Shabbos Archive, the Joy of the Sabbath Archive, organized in the Warsaw Ghetto by a historian, Dr. Emanuel Ringelblum. On March 1st, 1944, just a week before he was arrested by the Gestapo, Emanuel Ringelblum wrote one of his last letters to a friend who, like himself, was hiding in German-occupied Warsaw. And the letter, he said, if you don't live to see the liberation, and I don't live to see the liberation, what will happen to the OS? The OS was the code word for the Onyx Shabbos, the Joy of the Sabbath Archive. They chose that code word because they met every Saturday afternoon to chart strategy and decide what they were going to do, but it was a way of keeping it all secret. But he said, if we don't live to see the liberation, what will happen to the archive? And Emanuel Ringelblum had very good reason to worry, because by the time the war ended a year later, of the 60 or so people that Ringelblum brought into the archive, there were only 3 survivors. And of the 3 survivors, only one, Hirschwasser, knew where the archive had been buried. That is, under the Jewish school in the Warsaw Ghetto on Nowolipki 68. And those survivors, Hirschwasser, his wife, and an amazing woman, Rachel Auerbach, whose memoirs I just translated, they begged, they pleaded with everybody to try to locate that archive. But if you saw what Warsaw looked like in 1945, after the bombing in September 39, after the ghetto uprising in 43, after the Polish uprising in August 1944, where 200,000 Poles died, there was nothing left of the city. The city was a heap of ruins, and it was hard to find where a street had been, much less where a house had been. But finally, with some financial help from the United States, the Jewish Historical Institute in Poland organized a team of surveyors and engineers. There was a church steeple that survived. So using pre-war aerial photographs, they kind of guessed where in the rubble Nowolipki 68 must have been. It was kind of like drilling for oil or something. And on September 18th, 1946, a shovel hit one of the first of 10 tin boxes. And we see here, Hirschwasser is taking one of the tin boxes from Michal Borvich. Now, Hirschwasser survived, his back is to you here, he survived by the thinnest of margins, once jumping from a train taking him to Treblinka. And had he died, we probably never would have found the archive. But this guy, Michal Borvich, the guy with the mustache, he also survived by a slim margin. He was hanged in the Janowska labor camp in Lvov in 1943, but the rope broke. And the SS man, being a gentleman, didn't believe in hanging people twice, so he was released back into the camp. and then he made his escape. By the way, just on the basis of what I see from what happened to my own family, my mother and aunts and so on, survival was dumb luck. Courage, maybe, but more often than not, to make the courage work, you just needed to be lucky. Vassar said, wait a minute, we buried a lot more than that. Keep digging. But they couldn't find anything else. So all they found then were those 10 tin boxes, which was the first cache of the archive that they buried in August 1942. Then Poland became communist. The survivors left for Israel. And then 4 years later, in December 1950, as Polish construction workers were building new buildings on the site of the old Warsaw Ghetto, they discovered 2 big aluminum milk cans. And those 2 big aluminum milk cans were the second cache that was buried in February 1943. And unlike the tin boxes, where there had been a lot of water seepage, so a lot of documents were ruined, and many photographs were ruined because of the water seepage, the aluminum milk cans protected the documents very, very well. Now, anyone who knew anything about Poland after the war, at all the death camps, at all the places where Jews were murdered, people engaged in kind of a California gold rush. People came with shovels to dig up bodies because everybody knew that Jews were wealthy and they had gold. So in Treblinka, Belzec, all the soil was dug up. So these construction workers saw the milk cans, well, gold, diamonds. When they saw papers, they were going to junk them all. But then the foreman came back from his lunch break, Wojciech. He said, you can't junk this. You have to give this to the Jewish Historical Institute. So that's how this valuable second cache of the archive survived. Now, according to Vassar, a week before the outbreak of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, there was yet a third cache buried under the brushmaker's shop on Świętojerska 34, which was the site of very heavy fighting during the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto. After the war, that site became the location of the Chinese embassy in Poland. That third cache has never been found. In about 2002, the Chinese allowed some Israeli searchers to look for it, but they couldn't find anything. And I think that third cache is lost forever. So as you could see, not everything has been found. Nevertheless, we still have about 35,000 usable documents. The Jewish Historical Institute in Poland has just published them all in a 36-volume edition, plus a 10-volume edition in English of selected documents. So this is a lot of stuff, and it's maybe half or 2/3 of what they actually buried. Now, one obvious question that you might want to ask is, well, who cares? Why is this important? Well, it goes to the title that I chose for my book, Who Will Write Our History? The Germans thought they would win the war, and they would decide how the Jews would be remembered, if they would be remembered at all. And of course, every day in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Jews saw German film crews and cameramen doing what they could to leave a record of Jews as a filthy, despicable people. And Jews knew exactly how the Germans would have portrayed them for posterity. Indeed, one of Ringelblum's teachers, the historian Isaac Schipper, who was killed in Majdanek just before he was murdered, he told a fellow inmate, what we know about murdered peoples is usually what their killers choose to say about them. So the killers could tell a story about how terrible we were, or the killers might decide not to say anything. But Schipper's pupil, Emanuel Ringelblum, said no, even if we don't live to see it, we will leave time capsules full of buried documents, and that even if we die, someday those time capsules will surface and people will remember us on the basis of Jewish sources and not on the basis of German sources. And this was what it was all about. Now imagine had the archive never been found. Scholars could only have written about the Warsaw Ghetto, 500,000 Jews, on the basis of German documents and some survivor testimony. But only about 2% of the Jews who were in the Warsaw Ghetto ever survived. And their testimony would not have been a cross-section. And those 500,000 Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto would have been remembered as a mass of faceless victims, without names, without dreams, aspirations, without agency. So the fact that so many documents survived is a great victory, and it shows that Jews could really fight, not just with guns, because very few Jews had access to guns, but Jews could fight with paper and pen. The great Jewish historian Shimon Dubnov, just before he was murdered in Riga, yelled to his fellow Jews, Jeden verschreibt, Jews, write everything down. In 1946, in the ruins of crematorium number 3 in Birkenau, we found glass bottles stuffed with the writings of Zalman Gradovsky, who was in the Sonderkommando, working inside the gas chambers, and who was killed in August 44. A second bottle was found in 1964. There was a young Jewish woman in Krakow awaiting execution, and she wrote a long journal on toilet paper. And her inmates, her fellow inmates, made 4 copies, and that survived. And I can go on and on. There were also secret archives in Białystok and in Vilna and in Lodz. But the Oyneg Shabbos archive in the Warsaw Ghetto was by far the biggest such documentation project. It brought together, as I said, 60 people of all political persuasions. Ringelblum himself was a left-wing Marxist. You had communists, you had rabbis, you had Zionist Bundists. They all buried the hatchet to pursue a common national mission, to document the sufferings of the Jewish people. And this was quite a feat. The archive had an executive committee that plotted strategy, met every Saturday afternoon. There was a team of interviewers. Now that was very important because the way to get information from what was going on outside of Warsaw was to interview the refugees that the Germans were dumping into the Warsaw Ghetto. But these refugees were infected with typhus. They were covered in lice. To get into those refugee centers, you knew that the odds of getting typhus and dying were quite high. And yet these interviewers did their job. Many of them did die, but thanks to them, the Oyneg Shabbos has more than 400 records from locations outside of Warsaw. The agenda of the archive evolved over time. One basic agenda item was to collect stuff, diaries, and advertisements for theater performances, and instructions from the Judenrat on how to cook the frozen rotten potatoes that the Germans allocated as part of the ration. By the way, the official German food ration in the Warsaw Ghetto was 190 calories a day. In the soup kitchens, you could, for your bowl of soup and your slice of bread, it could get you up to 700 calories. But the fact that 80% of the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto had not died of starvation and disease, only, quote unquote, only 100,000 were dead by the time the deportations to Treblinka began. That shows an incredible battle the Jews waged to stay alive. 90% of the calories consumed in the Warsaw Ghetto were smuggled in. And the archive, of course, documented all of this. In 1941, again, before they knew about the final solution, before they knew that the Germans intended to kill them all, the archive embarked on a huge study of Jewish society under German occupation with 80 different topics: women, children, corruption, religious life, Polish-Jewish relations. And they were planning to issue a book of 1,600 pages. This study was in full swing when, on July 22nd, 1942, the deportations to Treblinka began. Every day, the Jewish police handed over 7,000 Jews to the Germans, who put them on the cattle cars and sent them to Treblinka. It was the Jewish police who did much of the dirty work. They were promised that in exchange they would save their own skins and that of their families. Now, that summer of 42, the archive faced a major crisis. Every day somebody was carried off. The 60 became 50, became 40, became 30. If you look at Ringelblum's handwriting during that period, you could see that he was on the brink of a nervous breakdown. He couldn't finish a sentence. He was torn between his desire to go into hiding and save his wife and son and his feeling of responsibility for the archive. And yet, in the middle of that horrible, horrible time, they kept on going. They kept on working. And you might ask a natural question: why, as their world was collapsing all around them, why did they not just give up? An answer can be found in a document that we discovered in the milk cans. It was written by a member of the archive, a young woman named Gustava Jarecka. And before she was killed in Treblinka with her 2 children, she had been asked by Ringelblum to go through the ghetto during the roundups and write down what she saw, because she was a secretary in the Judenrat, and she had a pass that Ringelblum thought might save her from arrest. And Jarecka said, "How could you have blamed us Jews for having thought that the story of man's history, the story of human history, is a story of progress? We were taught that it's a story of progress from savagery to barbarism to decency, that history moves forward to something better. Today I saw Germans murdering a little kid, and I realized that it's just the opposite, that history is regressing from decency towards savagery. And if that's the case, then here's what I hope," and now I'm quoting her directly, "that someday, if somebody finds these writings, may these writings serve as a stone under history's wheel," as a stone under history's wheel. That is, if the wheel of history is moving towards barbarism, then maybe someday people will say, "My God, how could we have allowed this to happen? How could this have taken place? Let's make sure that such a disaster never happens again." During that terrible summer and fall, about 7 Jews arrived in the Warsaw Ghetto who had escaped from the death camps. 1 escapee from Chelmno and 6 escapees from Treblinka. The Oyneg Shabbos took down reports on all these death camps, and that was part of the 4 lengthy messages that the archive sent via secret Polish couriers to the Polish government in exile in London, who then gave them to the American and the British government. In November 1942, a report reached London which had a detailed map of Treblinka, even as the camp was still killing 10 to 15,000 Jews a day. Ringelblum insisted on the importance of writing everything down immediately. Don't wait. If you see something, write it down, because tomorrow you might be dead. or tomorrow you might be a different person. And he understood, as a trained historian would, the fundamental difference between real-time testimony from somebody living in a ghetto that's not yet destroyed, somebody writing who doesn't know what's going to happen tomorrow, the difference between that kind of testimony and the testimony of a survivor who has made it through the war and is now looking back. And I'll give you an example of these enormous differences. There was a woman, a member of the archive, called Cecilia Slapakova, and she was in charge of the study of Jewish women under the German occupation. And she was very diligent, and she interviewed PhDs and librarians and biologists and a wealthy woman who opened a house of prostitution and women who engaged in smuggling, the whole gamut. And in May 1942, she wrote, "There's no question that the Jewish woman has shown that in this war, she has much more psychological strength than men. That as the war goes on, men are more prone to depression, men are more prone to apathy, and it's the women who step up, it's the women who run the soup kitchens, it's the women who take care of the kids. And one thing I'm sure of, that when this war is over, the Jewish woman in Poland will not allow herself to be shoved back into the kitchen. She will demand an equal place at the table." Well, she and her 5-year-old daughter were killed in Treblinka 2 months later. Now, but let's assume that she'd survived and she had arrived someday at Sarasota and her grandkids said, "Bubby, write down what you went through." Would she have even known that once upon a time in the Warsaw Ghetto, she was waxing lyrical about Jewish women after the war in Poland? The ghetto would have shrunk in her memory to the size of a little peanut. What she would have remembered were the camps and the death marches and how she survived. But thanks to the archive, we have the different voices of Polish Jewry on the eve of destruction. Children in June 1942 writing an assigned essay. What do I want to be when the war is over? The Piaseczner Rebbe, Kalonymus Shapiro, wrestling with the theological implications of how can Hashem allow this to happen. An ordinary woman, Mrs. Kaplan, the chair of her House committee, meeting Mrs. Cohen and Mrs. Goldberg, and they're trying to make a list of all the kids in the building who were not getting enough food and trying to match them with families who might have something to feed them with at least once or twice a week. A ghetto mailman, Peretz Opaczynski, who described how in September 1942, in the middle of the deportations, the Germans put little 2-year-olds on a bench in the blazing sun in the middle of the street. Their parents had already been taken. The kids were screaming for their parents. Any Jew who went up to those kids to try to give them food or water, savagely beaten. And Opaczynski wrote, "You know, the Germans didn't have to put that bench there. They kept it there just so we Jews could suffer a little bit more. And then there's an essay by a Yiddish writer named Shia Perle, who was murdered in Auschwitz in 1943. On August 1942, Perle saw something terrible. Of course, you saw something terrible every minute. But he saw a Jewish policeman dragging a little 5-year-old by the hand and going to his SS handler and said, "This is my 5th head of the day." Because they had to deliver 5, 6, or 7 a day. The SS man calmly pulled out a pistol, shot the little kid, and as the little kid was dying and the blood was spreading on the pavement, the SS man lit a cigarette and said, "This little dog doesn't count as a head. Go get me an adult." And the Jewish policeman scampered off to get an adult. And Perle wrote something which he never would have written, had he survived the war. He said, "A people that can produce such bastards as the Jewish police is a people that deserves everything it's getting." Now, after the war, this never would have been said. The 6 million were survivors, they were Kedoshim, but real-time writing was very different. There was a lot of anger against other Jews. And there was also, of course, imagine that these Jews were dying, not even having the comfort of knowing that after the war there would be a state of Israel. It looked as if the Jewish people was just sinking into the abyss. And the despair and the anger, this is what you get in those real-time documents. Now, I was given strict marching orders to speak for only 30 minutes, so I will... 35. Okay. Okay. As I said, Emanuel Ringelblum could have easily have read what Perla just wrote and said, you know what, this makes us look pretty bad. I'm going to tear this up. This isn't going in the milk can. But Ringelblum put it in, and there's a lot of bad stuff in those milk cans. But what Ringelblum believed is he didn't believe in alternative facts. He believed that there was such a thing as facts, and that if historians discovered this archive someday, they would respect what he was doing because they knew that he was not engaging in any censorship. And he also was betting on the fact that the weight of the evidence would be positive, that hundreds of thousands of ordinary Jews fought hard to keep their decency. And they did what they could, even though they had no chance in hell of surviving. Now, as I said, Ringelblum wore different hats. He was very much involved in politics, the left labor Zionists, very, very left-wing political party. They believed in a binational Jewish, Arab, Yiddish-speaking Palestine. Don't ask, I won't try to explain that. It was in the political party that Ringelblum met his wife, Yehudis Cutler, and they had one son, Yuri. Yehudis Cutler's father was a Hasidic rabbi, so he didn't like his son-in-law very much. But Ringelblum and Yehudis were over the moon about their boy. And to make ends meet, Ringelblum had tons of jobs, and one job was teaching in a high school for middle-class, spoiled Jewish girls, taught in Polish. And I tracked down one of his students in Queens many years later, and she said, we used to make fun of Dr. Ringelblum. He'd always come in sweaty and disheveled, and we would kind of crack jokes. And when an exam was scheduled, they didn't want to take the exam, one of the girls would be delegated to raise her hand. Dr. Ringelblum, you haven't said much about your son lately. And Ringelblum would pull out his wallet, show pictures, tell about the boy, the bell would ring, and they wouldn't have to take the exam. On the fourth day of the Battle of the Warsaw Ghetto, Ringelblum was caught and sent to a labor camp in Travniki, from where he escaped in August. Very daring escape, it's all in my book. And he returns to occupied Warsaw and goes into a hideout where there are 37 Jews, including his wife and son. And this is maintained with Jewish money, but there's a Polish family who are given money to start a grocery store to kind of cover up the purchases of food. And the conditions in this hideout were really terrible. There are two people who left and went to and survived. And I talked to one who was in Israel after the war, and she said it was dark and the air was stifling and people were literally stepping on each other's toes. 37 people, always afraid of being discovered. And Ringelblum would be in a corner just writing. He didn't participate in the arguments, he just wrote. He wrote an amazing historical record. He wrote thousands of pages. I met a courier named Wanda Rottenberg. Every week she'd come, she'd take the paper, and she'd give Ringelblum more paper and more ink. But finally, on March 7th, 1944, the lover of the Pole who was risking his life got angry at him, and they were announced to the Gestapo. The Pole was murdered, the Pole's son was murdered, and the 37 Jews, including Ringelblum, were taken to the Paviak prison, and they were shot on March 10th, 1944. Now, in the Paviak prison, there was a Jewish journalist named Yechiel Hirschhout, who said that when the prisoners heard that Ringelblum was now in the jail, they tried to figure out a way to save him. They figured they could bribe guards and move him into another cell. And Hirschhout went into Ringelblum's cell to try to talk him into cooperating with the scheme. Ringelblum had been badly beaten, and his son was sitting on his lap. And Hirschhout said, "We can get you out of here." And Ringelblum pointed to the boy, and Hirschhout said, "No." The wife, "No." Ringelblum said, "I'm not going to leave them." And the last words that Hirschhout remembers Ringelblum saying, he was saying this in Yiddish, "Was ist schuldig der Kleine? Zu liebem wichtig nur stark das Herz." Why is this little guy, what is he guilty of? My heart is breaking because of him. And the next day they were all killed. I want to end this talk by going to the night of August 3rd, 1942, where one of the Oneg Shabbos members, Israel Lichtenstein, and two teenage boys who were his helpers were burying the first cache of documents, and they were stuffing paper into the tin boxes. And the Germans were only 50 yards away, and they all wrote their last wills and testament. None of them survived, but the last wills and testaments all survived. And Israel Lichtenstein was a teacher, and he said, "I don't want praise, but I've given my whole life to this archive. I want to be remembered. My name is Israel Lichtenstein. I want my wife to be remembered. Her name is Gela Sexton. She's an artist, and she designed sets for the children's theater in the ghetto. I want my daughter Margalit to be remembered. She's 20 months old, but she equals 4-year-olds in intelligence. And if you don't believe me, here are teachers that you can ask." So he's still shepping nachas from his little girl. I believe that we, the Jews of Eastern Europe, are a redeeming sacrifice for the Jewish people. The Jewish people will survive. And so in the last weeks of his life, Lichtenstein reminded us of the great legacy of the Oneg Shabbos archive. The importance of memory, the importance of respecting these people, not as anonymous victims, but as individuals, and the pride that they took in being part of a resilient, tough people. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Kassow, for that extraordinary portrayal of the foresight and selflessness of Emanuel Ringelblum and the Oneg Shabbos group. For those of you who are interested, we will be showing the film adaptation of Dr. Kassow's book tomorrow morning, January 28th, right here in the Aura at 10 a.m. Dr. Kassow has kindly agreed to join us to respond to any questions you might have at that time. And to whet your appetite, here is a trailer of that film.
Somewhere, years ago, there was a mother who knew that her son was the cleverest, the most talented, the most beautiful. And now the brightest and most beautiful child in the world lies in a strange street. And his name isn't even known.
We should have seen the worst coming. But we did not want to know the truth. We did not want to see it.
Does the world know about our suffering?
Emanuel Ringelblum understood that he had a story to tell, and it was the most important story he would ever have to tell.
Almost all the photography that we have was taken by the German propaganda unit.
Will the Germans write our history, or will we write our history?
Let the witness be our writing.
Their goal was to write the history of the war from the Jewish perspective. And there was no time to lose.
The worst scenario was in the process of happening.
Writing becomes the only recourse. That was the ultimate act of defiance.
You don't really need guns to fight. You could fight with paper and pen.
This is what made this collection of documents so absolutely unique.
One thing is clear to all of us. Our devotion and constant terror have not been in vain.
Among those taken away was Rabbi Uberman,
Geli 16,
Israel Lichtenstein,
Leib Golden,
Abraham Levin,
Halina,
Emanuel Ringelblum.
Remember, my name is Nahum Gazivich.
I am writing this as a witness.
Again, if you are able, may I ask you to please stand as I chant the El Malei Rachamim, our traditional Jewish memorial prayer, which has been adapted as a memorial prayer for the victims of the Holocaust. Then we will recite the Mourner's Kaddish together. El Malei Rachamim, Shochin Bamaromim, Hametzimenu Chanichon Atachat Kanfei HaShchina B'ma'alot Kedoshim U'Tachorim Kezohar HaRakia Mazhirim Lenishmot Sheshet Milyonei Achyoteinu Ve'achinu Asher Nisbu B'Shoah Ba'al harachamim, hastirim b'seter kanafecha leolamim, utzror b'tzror achayim et nishmatam, began eden tehem menuchatam, Adonai hu nachalatam, Yanuchu b'shalom al kezurei mishkevotam v'ta'amod tzidkatam lanu lechol Yisrael u'lechol ha'ne'evakim lechirut latzedek u'l'shalom v'nomar Amen. Mourner's Kaddish, please join me. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah. Be'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayechon u'yomechon u'v'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'vizman kariv imru Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudesha b'richu. Le'elam min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran v'yalma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama Rabbah min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Please be seated. On behalf of the Jewish Federation, Dr. Anna Cohen, and myself, we express our gratitude to Dr. Kassow, to Lotam and Eli Levy, and to our beloved Holocaust survivors and the generations after survivors for helping to make this such a meaningful and memorable event. Today, while we commemorate and pay tribute to the history of our past, we must always remind ourselves of the importance of memory and be mindful that history can repeat itself. We are seeing a resurgence of hatred, intimidation, threats, violence, and persecution. This rise is perpetrated by those who still believe in the stereotypes and conspiracy theories, the seeds of which were planted so many years ago and whose roots are deeply embedded and woven into the fabric of a dark sector of our society today. Educating about the Holocaust and its invaluable lessons are more important than ever to help combat today's insidious resurgence of anti-Semitism. Through Holocaust education, we can make a difference and foster hope to prevent a wholesale genocide of the Jewish people from happening again. We must teach the champions of our future, our children, to resist, reject, and refute all forms of hatred, and we must stand together in solidarity to hope for peace for all. Today, this is more urgent than ever. We must be vigilant. We must be upstanders, not bystanders, when these expressions of hatred surface. By standing up for what is right, we can make a difference. The rise of anti-Jew hate is not just a problem for Jews to solve. It is the harbinger of a cancer in our society that is fostering the spread of hatred against many groups of others. It's up to all of us to do something, and do something now. Before we ask you to join us in the lobby for refreshments and conversation, I remind you to please join us tomorrow in the Aura at 10 a.m. for the screening of the film Who Will Write Our History, and I will tell you, I've seen it. It is tremendous. It will boggle your mind. Unbelievable what these people did. There's a desk in the lobby where you can register for the movie if you've not done so already. Finally, I ask everyone to stand as we recite in unity our Hands Against Hate pledge. Together we endeavor to make ours an inclusive and peaceful community filled with love. I pledge to stand up and resist hate, bigotry, and bullying. I will not stay silent in the face of intolerance. I will work with my neighbors to create kinder, safer, and more inclusive communities for all. We offer a heartfelt thanks to all of you for joining us this evening. May peace reign amongst us all. Shalom, and please drive home safely.